if you were to look at a split screen of humanity right now,
Yeah.
and I mean literally today, April 10th, 2026, it honestly looks like some kind of, I don't know, a glitch in the Matrix.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because on the left side of the screen, you've got these literal sci-fi miracles happening. We've got rockets the size of skyscrapers landing themselves backward on floating platforms in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
We have agentic AI that can practically, run a whole corporation, execute trades, manage global supply chains while you are literally asleep. But then, and this is the glitch, you look at the right side of the screen and you see hundreds of millions of people who don't even have access to clean drinking water or a basic reliable meal.
It's jarring.
It's this massive contradiction that just feels entirely unresolved.
It really is. I mean, it is the ultimate paradox of progress, right? We have engineered this level of technological mastery that, frankly, our ancestors would have considered absolute magic.
Sorcery.
Exactly. Yet we are still grappling with the most primitive, fundamental failures of resource distribution. Like, we have the logistics networks to deliver a useless plastic gadget across the world in 24 hours.
Right to your doorstep.
Right. But we struggle to route basic caloric sustenance to a starving child. And that creates this profound cognitive dissonance for anyone who is actually paying attention to the macro picture.
Exactly. And we are anchoring ourselves right in the middle of that dissonance today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are standing right on the precipice of what a lot of people in the tech and philosophy spaces are now calling an age of abundance. I mean, the exponential leaps are everywhere. Yet extreme poverty remains this incredibly heavy anchor dragging the human experience down.
And the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves and really dig into today is whether this gap is just a permanent, baked-in inevitability of global capitalism. Like, is it just how the world works? Or is it simply a structural flaw, a bug in the system that we actually have the tools to patch right now?
Right. And that is the exact mission we are taking on today. We are exploring a highly specific and honestly rather radical blueprint designed to execute that exact patch.
It's a fascinating proposal.
It really is. The core material we're looking at is a 2026 essay by Paramendra Kumar Phagat, and it's titled Reimagining Equity to Serve Humanity. But, we aren't just reading one essay in a vacuum here.
No, you can't really do that with his work.
Exactly. We are layering it with this whole fascinating constellation of Bhagat's other frameworks, ranging from, macroeconomic theories on global trade to a really unique economic and spiritual philosophy he calls Kelkyism.
Which is an absolutely essential lens for this entire discussion. I mean, you rarely see someone attempting to merge the hard-nosed, hyper-rational logistics of Silicon Valley venture capital with the spiritual imperatives of ancient scripture.
It's a wild mix.
It is. Phagat operates under this operating system where technology, so AI, digital identity networks, space travel, they aren't just cool innovations or profit centers. He views them as the literal prophesied tools meant to usher in a post-scarcity reality.
Right. And that completely reframes the conversation from the jump. Because if tech is the prophesied tool for abundance, then, well, why aren't we abundant?
Exactly the right question.
And his answer is essentially this singular, incredibly provocative structural proposal. Basically, how the world's wealthiest individual, and in this specific thought experiment, he uses Elon Musk, could theoretically eradicate global poverty today without losing even a single ounce of operational control over his companies.
Which sounds like an impossible riddle, right?
Sounds like magic math.
Yeah. But to understand the mechanics of how that could actually work, we first have to understand the psychology and the reality of the archetype Phagat is using. The essay opens with a very deliberate, visceral image. He reminds us that Elon Musk was once, showering at the YMCA while building his first company, Zip2.
Right. But he isn't using that image to just retell a standard glamorous rags to riches startup myth, is he? It feels much more pointed than that.
Very pointed, yeah. It establishes a baseline of raw, almost ruthless founder discipline. It illustrates an individual who has spent decades absolutely redlining his own physical and cognitive capacity, pushing the boundaries of what the market and physics will allow.
Sleeping on the factory floor kind of energy.
Exactly. That YMCA shower is a proxy for extreme monomaniacal focus, and Phagat immediately juxtaposes that historical image with the reality of April 2026.
Yeah.
You have a net worth hovering somewhere around, $300 billion?
Something insane like that, yeah.
But the crucial detail, and this is where the financial engineering comes into play later, is that his wealth isn't liquid.
Right.
It isn't sitting in a checking account at Chase. It is entirely locked up in the equity of world-altering entities. SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, XAI.
And he absolutely refuses to sell it. Now, usually, this is the point in the discourse where the pitchforks come out, right? People demand billionaire wealth taxes.
Sure, that's the standard reaction.
But Fagat doesn't criticize the holding of that equity at all. He actually validates the long-term mission behind it. Every single one of these ventures is framed as an existential hedge for the species. SpaceX is literally a planetary backup plan. Colonizing Mars before an asteroid or a nuclear war wipes us out.
Or Neuralink and XAI being these massive species-level bets on maintaining human relevance in the face of superintelligence.
Yeah. So you're hitting on what we could maybe call the founder's paradox.
Yeah.
Musk is operating on a centuries-long timeline. He is optimizing for the survival of human consciousness in, like, the year 2300.
Right.
And when you are running the math on cosmic survival, the daily fluctuations of the present moment can seem like statistical noise. But Fagat introduces the ultimate tension here. How do you reconcile a centuries-long mission to save humanity with the immediate present-tense suffering happening on Earth today?
It's tough.
I was trying to conceptualize this, and we usually look at billionaire wealth like a massive sealed battery. The energy is entirely locked inside this proprietary box, and everyone is screaming at the founder to smash the battery open to power the grid right now.
Right, fix the immediate problem.
Exactly.
Right.
But the founder refuses because he needs that battery to power a spaceship to Mars tomorrow. So the question is, can we actually rewire the terminals to do both?
That is a phenomenal structural analogy, and that tension between the Mars timeline and the Earth timeline is particularly acute when we look at the specific context of the world right now in 2026.
Yeah, it's intense.
If we look at the margins of Fagat's broader work, we see a global environment that is simultaneously accelerating and fracturing in real time.
Yeah, the contextual backdrop of this essay is wild. You have agentic AI exploding, right? Taking over complex, multi-step cognitive labor. But at the exact same time, you have severe geopolitical friction. The essay makes frequent mentions of Iran, the Middle East, a potential regional war.
The contrast is everywhere.
And then there are these deeply surreal tech news clippings embedded in his thought process. Like, there's an article about the U.S. administration wanting video gamers to step up and fill a critical shortage of air traffic controllers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it perfectly encapsulates the dissonance you mentioned at the start. We have artificial intelligence capable of autonomous strategic decision-making, yet our physical infrastructure is so fragile, we don't have enough trained humans to safely guide commercial airplanes to the ground.
So we're pivoting to teenagers who play flight simulator.
Exactly. We have the capability to catch a returning rocket booster out of midair, yet our global supply chains are utterly at the mercy of regional conflicts. We possess extreme capability paired with extreme vulnerability.
So in the middle of all this macro-level chaos, you have this $300 billion battery locked inside this hyper-futuristic vision. And the tension between needing long-term control to execute that vision and the immediate utility of that massive capital is what leads to Fagat's core structural solution.
Which is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, let's unpack the actual mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Because he is essentially proposing a total hack of corporate governance.
He is. And this is where we shift from philosophy into hardcore financial engineering. Fagat acknowledges a fundamental truth of Silicon Valley scaling. For a founder CEO, particularly one running highly speculative, hardware-intensive companies, voting power matters infinitely more than the financial cash value of the stock.
Right, because control is what allows you to ignore short-term market pressures.
Oh, exactly.
Like, if Musk sells off a massive chunk of Tesla or SpaceX to fund global poverty initiatives, he dilutes his voting power. And if he dilutes his voting power, he risks losing the board of directors to institutional investors.
The Vanguards and BlackRocks of the world.
Yeah, and they only care about next quarter's profit margins, not terraforming a dead planet. So control is just a non-negotiable founder asset.
Precisely. We are heavily conditioned by traditional finance to view equity as a monolithic block. Like, if you own 10% of a company, we just naturally assume you hold 10% of the financial value and 10% of the voting power. They are tethered together.
Right, one-to-one.
But Fagat's primary mechanism is to surgically separate those two properties. He is advocating for a radical separation of power from value.
I want to push back on the legal and financial reality of this, though, because it sounds great in theory, but how does this actually work? You can't just extract $300 billion of value out of publicly traded companies without Wall Street panicking, right?
It's a fair question.
What happens to the institutional investors if the CEO announces he is spitting out all his economic value? Don't they demand he have, skin in the game?
It is a critical pushback, and it forces us to look at how dual-class share structures actually function in the real world. We already have precedents for this in companies like Meta with Mark Zuckerberg or historically with the Ford family.
Oh, right, the super voting shares.
Exactly. They hold a special class of super voting shares that give them disproportionate control relative to their actual financial stake. Faga is proposing taking this existing legal framework to its absolute logical extreme.
So he essentially engineers a new class of stock just for himself.
Exactly. You create a structure where the founder holds shares that possess 100% of the voting rights needed to maintain absolute control, but hold 0% of the dividend or liquidation value.
Wow.
He keeps every board seat. He dictates the strategy. He holds the remote control, to your battery analogy. But the underlying financial equity, the actual $300 billion in capital value, is transferred into a separate vehicle, like an irrevocable special purpose vehicle entirely dedicated to poverty alleviation.
But wait, a company like Tesla doesn't even pay a dividend. The value of the stock is entirely in its appreciation. So if he moves that stock into an SPV, how does the SPV get actual cash without selling the stock and tanking the market price?
That is the brilliance of modern capital markets. The SPV doesn't necessarily have to dump the stock on the open market all at once. Holding $300 billion in premium blue-chip tech equity gives that entity unimaginable borrowing power.
Oh, I see.
The SPV can borrow against the underlying asset at near-zero interest rates to fund immediate massive cash transfers. Or it can slowly liquidate over decades through pre-planned algorithmic sales that the market easily absorbs without a ripple. The mechanism of extraction is entirely solvable.
Okay, so assuming the financial engineering holds up, and it sounds like the legal frameworks do actually exist to support this, what really strikes me is what Bhagat explicitly forbids in this process.
Yeah, he's very clear on this.
He states very clearly, no intermediaries, no foundations with overhead. He is taking a massive swing at the traditional philanthropic industrial complex.
He is outright rejecting the Carnegie and Gates models of philanthropy.
Complete.
The traditional playbook involves parking vast sums of money in an endowment, hiring massive staffs of program officers, building fancy headquarters, and spending incredible amounts of time and money on galas, application processes, and impact reports.
It's an entire industry.
It is, and only a tiny, legally mandated fraction, usually around 5%, actually reaches the field each year.
It treats charity like a bloated private equity firm.
Exactly. Fagat is arguing that if you apply the ruthless founder discipline that built reusable rockets to the concept of philanthropy, you eliminate the bureaucracy, you bypass the entire charitable middle layer, and he notes that billionaires everywhere should study that playbook.
I mean, imagine the macroeconomic shift if this became the standard operating procedure for megacorporations. You could unlock literally trillions of dollars of dormant capital to solve immediate human crises.
Trillions, yes.
And the founders don't even have to compromise their egos or their visions. They still get to be the undisputed captains of industry. They just don't hoard the actual gold.
But that raises the most significant logistical hurdle of the entire essay.
Right.
If you successfully engineer the corporate spin-out of $300 billion, and you absolutely refuse to use traditional foundations, NGOs, or international governments as intermediaries, how on earth do you distribute the capital?
Yeah, where does it go?
How does a dollar actually move from a Silicon Valley SPV into the hands of a person living in extreme poverty halfway across the globe without getting siphoned off?
Which is where we have to look at the actual digital plumbing. Scott points directly to India as the definitive proof of concept for executing this at scale. He highlights a recent milestone where one Indian state, which he makes a point to note is roughly the population size of France, direct deposited the equivalent of $100 into the bank accounts of every single woman in that state.
Think about the scale of that execution. Every single woman. Instantly.
It's mind-blowing.
To understand why this is a paradigm shift, we have to contrast it with the historical reality of global aid. If you wanted to deploy capital to the poorest demographics in a developing nation 20 years ago, it was an absolute logistical nightmare.
Just forms in triplicate.
Worse, The money traveled from a Western donor to an international agency like USI, then to a national government, then to regional authorities, and finally to local physical distribution centers.
It's the ultimate leaky bucket problem.
Yes.
At every single layer, money is lost to administrative overhead, logistical friction, and quite frankly, rampant corruption. By the time the water reaches the root of the plant, there's barely a drop left.
Precisely. But Phagat argues that two specific pieces of Indian digital infrastructure have completely rewritten the architecture of distribution: Aadhaar and UPI.
Okay, let's break those down.
Aadhaar is India's national biometric digital identity program. It is the largest in the world, providing a unique, verifiable digital identity to over 1 billion people based on fingerprints and iris scans.
And the UPI is the Unified Payments Interface, right? The instant real-time payment system developed by their central banking authorities.
Correct. UPI facilitates interbank, peer-to-peer, and person-to-merchant transactions seamlessly and instantaneously via mobile devices. When you combine the two, you link a biometric, unfakeable identity directly to a digital bank account.
So because that linkage exists, you don't need the international agencies. You don't need the regional politicians taking a cut. And you don't need physical distribution centers with armed guards. You literally just need a verified database query and a digital send button.
It turns what used to be an impossible, multi-layered, multi-year logistical nightmare into a simple digital ping. Phagat describes this capability as running quantitative easing straight into the accounts of the poorest 10% of their populations.
I want to pause on that because the implications are massive, but I also have a major issue with how casually he presents this solution.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Right. He writes, take Aadhaar and UPI, export the model to every willing country. He talks about this bespoke, highly complex national infrastructure like we're just shipping a software patch via the cloud.
Just an over-the-air update.
Exactly. Can you seriously just drop a centralized biometric database and instant payment system into entirely different, highly fractured governments in 2026 without massive friction?
It is the most glaring vulnerability in his proposal. The technological code might be open source or easily replicable, but the geopolitical, legal, and societal hurdles of scaling India's infrastructure globally are staggering.
Yeah.
Aadhaar didn't happen overnight. It required a massive, decade-long state mobilization. It required a highly specific political will, a unique legal framework regarding data privacy, and a societal acceptance of centralized data collection that just does not exist universally.
Right. Think about trying to implement that in the West or in highly decentralized democracies.
Right.
We can't even agree on whether a social media platform should be allowed to track our web cookies.
Let alone iris scans.
Exactly. If a central authority proposed mandating iris scans and fingerprints for every single citizen to facilitate instant bank transfers, the privacy debates, the lawsuits, and the fears of state surveillance would stall the project for 20 years.
Oh, easily. And beyond the privacy concerns, there are intense physical infrastructure prerequisites. Building a system that relies on UPI requires a baseline of telecommunications penetration. You need reliable cellular networks, affordable smartphones, and a banking sector willing to integrate with an open-source protocol rather than protecting their proprietary transaction fees.
Which they hate doing.
Right. So exporting the model is an incredibly naive way to phrase a monumental geopolitical undertaking.
But if we strip away the casualness of his phrasing, does his underlying premise still hold? Like, is the capability actually there?
Yes. And that is the undeniable truth at the core of his argument. The friction is immense, but the capability now exists in the real world. The proof of concept is live.
It's not science fiction anymore.
Exactly. For the first time in human history, we possess the technological architecture to securely identify 1 billion individuals living in poverty and transfer value to them instantaneously with near zero friction. If that infrastructure is truly ready, as Phagat insists, the only missing piece of the puzzle is the capital to flow through it.
Okay, so let's assume the geopolitical friction can be overcome, or at least bypassed in willing nations. Let's assume the technological pipes are laid and secure. What actually happens to a localized economy when you push hundreds of billions of dollars through those pipes directly to the world's poorest people?
This brings us to Phagat's core macroeconomic argument, which revolves around a stark, brilliantly simple definition of the problem itself. He states flatly, poverty, at its core, is a lack of cash.
It sounds almost insultingly obvious when you say it out loud.
It does.
But that definition completely runs counter to decades of paternalistic, top-down development policy. For the last 50 years, the prevailing approach in global aid has been the assumption that poor people don't just lack cash. They lack education, they lack entrepreneurial acumen, they just don't know how to manage resources.
Right, the we know better attitude.
Exactly. Therefore, the West needs to give them highly managed programs, agricultural training, and microloans with incredibly strict oversight and reporting requirements.
It is a deeply entrenched paternalism. Fagat is advocating for the exact opposite: unconditional, direct cash transfers, absolutely no strings attached.
Which scares a lot of traditional economists.
It does, but his argument is rooted in the empirical data of the last decade of cash transfer trials. When you give people in extreme poverty cash, they do not hoard it, and they do not overwhelmingly waste it on vices, he notes. Give people cash and watch them spend it on food, school fees, medicine, small businesses. The poor spend immediately.
This makes me think of how we deploy economic stimulus. Traditional stimulus often feels like trying to water a massive tree by spraying a mist on the very top, leaves the major banks, the massive corporations,
Right.
and just praying that the moisture eventually drips down through the branches to reach the roots. But Pagat is saying, take a massive hose, bury it right at the deepest, driest roots of the global economy, and turn it on full blast. The entire tree grows from the bottom up.
The watering the roots analogy perfectly captures the macroeconomic shift he is proposing. Bagat notes that economists view this bottom-up approach as the least inflationary, most stimulative form of stimulus possible.
I think we need to unpack exactly why injecting cash at the absolute bottom of the economic pyramid reacts completely differently than traditional quantitative easing.
We definitely do.
Because when I hear the phrase quantitative easing, I immediately think of the 2008 financial crisis bailouts or the massive 2020 pandemic response. Central banks pumped trillions of dollars into the financial system. And to the average person, it seemed to mostly just inflate the stock market and housing prices out of reach, while real wages stagnated.
That is the exact failure mode of top-down quantitative easing. When central banks inject capital into the top of the system, it goes into the hands of financial institutions and high-net-worth individuals who already have their basic human needs met.
Right, they're not hungry.
Exactly. If you give a millionaire an extra $100,000, they don't buy more groceries or a second refrigerator. They buy more equities, they buy real estate, they buy scarce assets. The money gets trapped in the upper echelons of the financial system, driving up asset prices without generating real economic utility. It creates asset inflation.
But when you use the Aadhaar and UPI pipes to drop $100 directly into the digital wallet of a mother living in extreme poverty,
She doesn't buy a fractional share of a tech stock. She goes to the local market and buys a sack of rice. She pays the local school teacher for her child's tuition. She buys antibiotics from the local pharmacy.
it's immediate survival spending.
Yes. That money immediately enters the real, localized, physical economy. And this introduces the most critical economic concept in Fagat's entire framework, the velocity of money.
The velocity of money. I noticed in the bibliography of his work, he actually authored a book titled Velocity Money, Crypto, Karma, and the End of Traditional Economics. So this isn't just a passing thought.
No, not at all.
This concept is the load-bearing pillar of his worldview. How does velocity actually function in this context?
But velocity of money is simply the rate at which a single unit of currency changes hands within an economy over a specific period of time. If I give you $1 and you put it in a savings account or under your mattress for a year, the velocity of that dollar is zero.
Right. It's doing nothing.
It generates absolutely no compounding economic activity. But if I give $1 to someone who is starving, they immediately spend it at the local baker. The baker takes that dollar and buys flour from the local miller.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The miller takes that same dollar and buys shoes for his child from the village cobbler. The cobbler uses it to buy materials. In a single week, that one initial dollar has facilitated $4 or $5 worth of actual economic transactions.
So by targeting the absolute bottom 10% of the global population, you aren't just achieving a moral good. You are mathematically maximizing the velocity of the capital. You are engineering immediate, intense, localized economic velocity.
Precisely. If Musk's SPV were to inject $300 billion at the deepest roots of the global economy, it wouldn't just be a $300 billion transfer of value. Through the multiplier effect of high-velocity spending, it could generate $1 trillion or more of real economic activity. It lifts entire communities out of mere subsistence survival and integrates them into active market participation. And because it directly incentivizes the supply of real goods and services, more bakers baking to meet the new demand, more millers milling it avoids the trap of asset inflation. It is true organic growth.
But I have to play devil's advocate here
Now
again.
do for it.
This entire model assumes a functioning local supply chain. What if there is simply nothing to buy? What if you inject $100 into a village, but the local well is completely dry and the regional agricultural system has collapsed due to drought?
Then the cash is useless.
Right. A digital ping on a smartphone doesn't magically manifest clean water or a physical bag of wheat if the infrastructure is dead.
That is a highly sophisticated critique, and it is one that Bhagat actually anticipates. He recognizes that direct cash isn't a panacea if the physical layer of the economy is fundamentally broken. If the supply chain cannot respond to the price signals created by the cash injection, you will just get localized hyperinflation. More money chasing the same zero goods.
Exactly.
What don't
Which
they
helps
say?
nobody.
This is why he provides highly specific, scalable, physical alternatives to the cash transfer model.
Right. He offers a menu of options. If direct cash via UPI is deemed too complex, or if the supply chains are broken, he pivots to universal physical needs. He suggests the founder could fund clean drinking water for entire regions.
Which is a massive undertaking.
He acknowledges this would require tens of billions of dollars in capital expenditure, but for an engineering-obsessed CEO like Musk, it provides something vital, measurable, physical metrics.
Founders thrive on complex physical engineering challenges. Digging wells, building desalination plants, and laying water pipelines are highly complex logistical problems that require exactly the kind of operational rigor a company like SpaceX possesses.
It's an engineering problem.
Right. But the alternative proposal that is truly fascinating, the one that merges physical infrastructure with deep cultural resonance, is his proposition regarding the concept of languor.
This was the part of the essay that really made me stop and think. Fagad suggests Musk could scale the Sikh concept of langar-free community kitchens, serving one nutritious meal a day to every village in India every single day.
It's a beautiful idea.
For anyone unfamiliar with this, can you explain the cultural and operational reality of langar?
It is one of the most profound traditions of communal care in human history. Langar is a centuries-old practice embedded in the Sikh religion. If you visit a gurdwara, a Sikh place of worship, the most famous being the Golden Temple in Amritsar, they operate these massive, ceaseless community kitchens.
Like running 247.
Pretty much. They serve free, highly nutritious vegetarian meals to absolutely anyone who walks through the doors.
And the radical part is the equality of it.
Absolutely. The foundational ethos is that everyone, regardless of their religion, their caste, their gender, or their economic status, sits together on the floor at the exact same level, eating the exact same food as absolute equals.
Kings sit next to paupers.
Exactly. It was designed historically to break down the rigid hierarchies of the caste system.
It's a beautiful spiritual practice. But Fagad isn't just admiring it as the religious tradition, is he? He wants to extract the operational code of langar and scale it using Silicon Valley logistics. He actually details a public exchange he had on social media with Sabir Bhatia about this exact idea.
The inclusion of Sabir Bhatia is a highly strategic signal to the reader. Sabir Bhatia is the founder of Hotmail. Hotmail was one of the very first internet companies to achieve true exponential global virality.
Right, everyone had a Hotmail account.
It scaled at a speed that was unprecedented in human history because it utilized standardized digital protocols. By bringing Bhatia into the conversation about a Sikh community kitchen, Fagad is explicitly merging the ancient ethos of communal care with hypermodern tech founder scaling mechanics.
So how do Hotmail logistics apply to serving physical meals?
Virality and standardization. Hotmail scaled because the digital protocol was identical everywhere. Langar scales if you establish a standardized physical protocol. Standardized localized supply chains, standardized caloric output, standardized distribution models that can be replicated in 10,000 villages simultaneously.
I see.
Bhatia's assessment, as quoted by Fagad, is that the logistics are solvable. The money is the missing piece.
Think about the magnitude of that statement. A daily, reliable, nutritious meal available to anyone, scaling across millions of villages. It fundamentally changes the definition of charity.
It completely reframes it.
It stops being a sporadic, crisis-driven intervention and becomes a ubiquitous, frictionless public utility. It's like turning food security into something as reliable as the electrical grid.
But executing physical infrastructure at that scale without relying on state governments requires a very specific type of capital deployment, which is why Bogart explicitly invokes what he calls the MacKenzie Scott playbook.
Yes.
He holds her operational model up as the absolute gold standard for modern capital deployment, elevating her significantly above the traditional billionaire philanthropic models we talked about earlier.
We talked about how traditional models act like private equity firms. How does the MacKenzie Scott playbook actually function differently on the ground?
It is the complete antithesis of the bureaucratic model. As Bogart writes, her core methodology is to give quietly, quickly, and at massive scale.
No galas.
No galas. She does not build a sprawling foundation headquarters. Her streamlined team identifies highly effective grassroots organizations that are already executing the work on the ground, organizations that already understand the local supply chains and cultural nuances.
Right.
And this is the part that terrifies traditional philanthropists. She just transfers the money and gets out of the way.
Unrestricted funding.
Exactly. No massive grant applications, no mandatory quarterly impact reports, no board seats demanded. She inherently trusts the people who are closest to the problem to know exactly how to solve it.
But let me push back on that, because the immediate counter-argument from any traditional wealth manager is, doesn't zero oversight equal massive fraud?
Sure, that's the fear.
If you are just blindly wiring billions of dollars to hundreds of local organizations, aren't you inviting inefficiency and theft?
It is a valid concern, but you have to compare it to the failure rate of highly managed aid. Even with intense, suffocating oversight, massive amounts of traditional aid are lost to administrative overhead, which is often just a legalized, institutionalized form of inefficiency.
That's a good point.
The MacKenzie Scott model operates on a different mathematical premise. It accepts a fractional margin of fraud or failure as the necessary cost of doing business in order to achieve unprecedented velocity and scale of capital deployment.
So it's about speed.
Yes. If you waste 10% of the funds but deploy the other 90% 10 times faster than a traditional foundation, the net human benefit is exponentially higher.
Just give. That is the fundamental mandate. And if you look closely at all of these proposals, whether it is the algorithmic cash transfers via UPI, the massive clean water infrastructure projects, or scaling a decentralized network of Langar kitchens, notice what is completely absent from Pagat's text.
What's that?
He never once asks Elon Musk or any other billionaire to form an exploratory committee. He never asks them to partner with United Nations or seek government approval. He is explicitly saying that accountability must be built directly into the founder's own centralized decision-making process.
It is an appeal directly to the ego, the capability, and the autocracy of the singular tech founder. Pagat writes, Musk would decide the structure, the timing, the metrics. No one could blame the government if something went wrong.
Total ownership.
Exactly. If you genuinely believe you possess the engineering capability to build a self-landing orbital rocket, you must inherently believe you possess the capability to engineer a water distribution network without a government middleman slowing you down. It is about ultimate ownership of the outcome.
But stepping up to that level of direct, massive, global action requires a profound psychological shift. It requires moving from a mindset of endless accumulation and futuristic hedging into a mindset of immediate, radical generosity.
It's a huge leap.
And this is where the entire essay pivots. We have to examine the spiritual and moral operating system that underpins all this financial and technological theory.
This is exactly where the essay transcends being merely a clever financial white paper and reveals its deeper philosophical core. To fully grasp Pagat's argument, we have to look at the very first element on the page, positioned before the essay even officially begins.
The tweet.
Yes. He quotes a tweet from Pope Leo XIV posted on the exact date of the essay, April 10th, 2026.
Let me read that quote because it hits with incredible force given everything we've just discussed. The Pope writes, "Hundreds of millions of people throughout the world are immersed in extreme poverty, yet disproportionate wealth remains in the hands of a few. It is an unjust scenario in the face of which we cannot fail to question ourselves and commit to change things."
It is a direct, uncompromising moral indictment. And Pagat masterfully weaves this call from the Pope, a demand to question our fundamental economic structures and commit to immediate change with the essay's own provocative opening line.
which is,
The impending age of abundance was prophesied in the scriptures thousands of years ago.
but it's such an incredibly jarring, fascinating juxtaposition. You have the head of the Catholic Church calling out the immediate physical injustice of extreme wealth inequality, and the author linking the solution not just to Silicon Valley financial hacks, but to ancient prophecy.
To understand how these connect, we have to return to the concept of Kalkiism that we touched on at the beginning. Pagat is not just a technology analyst observing trends. He is actively propagating a comprehensive worldview.
Right.
If we look at the titles of his broader work, Kalkiism, The Economic and Spiritual Blueprint for an Age of Abundance, and The Last Age, Lord Kalki, Prophecy, and the Final War for Peace, we see a framework where technology and spirituality are entirely inseparable.
They're one and the same to him.
Exactly. In Hindu eschatology, Kalki is the final avatar of the deity Vishnu, prophesied to appear at the end of the current epoch, the Kali Yuga, an age of darkness and degradation to destroy that darkness and usher in a new golden era of truth and abundance.
So under this Kalkist framework, Pagat views these exponential technologies, agentic AI that can automate labor, reusable rockets that reduce the cost of mass, global digital identity networks like Aadhaar that can route capital instantly, not merely as the products of clever engineering.
They're not just gadgets.
They aren't just tools to generate maximum shareholder value or cool gadgets for early adopters. They are the literal prophesied mechanisms designed to execute the age of abundance.
Exactly. The capability to end human suffering exists today. The physical and digital infrastructure is ready. The immense wealth required to fuel it has already been generated. The prophecy, in his view, is locked and loaded, ready to be fulfilled.
So what's the holdup?
The only bottleneck, the only thing preventing this post-scarcity abundance from washing over humanity is the artificial hoarding of capital by a microscopic fraction of individuals. The billionaires are essentially functioning as a dam, holding back the prophesied river of abundance.
What is so compelling about his proposed solution is that breaking that dam does not require a violent revolution.
No pitchforks.
It doesn't require dismantling capitalism or destroying the system that built the technology. It simply requires the individuals holding the wealth to make a different structural choice. They can keep the control, they just have to release the capital.
Which brings us to the most powerful synthesizing quote toward the end of the essay. Pagat writes, "Humanity's backup plan is important. So is the life of the child who goes to bed hungry tonight. Both can be true at the same time."
It perfectly resolves the founder's paradox we discussed earlier. It validates the ambition to reach the stars, to ensure the long-term survival of human consciousness, but it rigorously tethers that ambition to the moral obligation we have to each other down here on Earth right now.
We do not have to choose.
We don't have to choose between funding the future and surviving the present. The battery can power both.
It suggests that our technological capability and our financial engineering have, finally, caught up to our oldest, most deeply held moral aspirations. We possess the tools to end extreme poverty in our lifetime. We just have to choose to execute the code. The infrastructure is waiting, and the need is absolute.
And that is a hell of a thought to leave off on. We've spent this time exploring how the world's wealthiest individual could theoretically restructure his equity, leverage biometric payment networks, and trigger massive macroeconomic velocity to change the world without losing a single ounce of his influence.
It's a lot to process.
But as we wrap up, I want to pivot this entirely back to you, the listener. Think about the structure of your own life. Obviously, you probably aren't sitting on $300 billion in restricted tech stock.
Probably not.
But the psychology of hoarding is universal. Where in your own life are you confusing the resources you hoard with the actual control you need to achieve your goals? What is the capital you are sitting on, falsely believing you need it to hold on to your power?
It's a great question.
What could you spin out today, whether it's your excess time, your specific expertise, or your actual resources that would be completely life-changing for someone in your local ecosystem while leaving your own trajectory entirely intact? Something to seriously think about. Until next time.